Good morning, everyone. My name is Jovita Woodrich, and I work with Volunteer Florida. I'll tell you just a little bit about that, but I am so excited to be here today, and hopefully you all are as well. I'm going to take a photograph with my internet phone, and everyone is going to wave at the camera as though they are thrilled that they are sitting here this morning, okay? So we want our best actors and actresses, or just your genuine feelings about today. All right, ready? On three, wave. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, convincing, very convincing. That was really, Liz's saying is really good. I will send that to you all, should you care to have it. Well, we are really excited to be here this morning, and it is great to go first in terms of volunteerism and philanthropy. I really believe that these are just real core components of our social fabric, as are these other work group focus areas. So I'm going to briefly introduce myself and then have each panelist briefly introduce themselves, and then we will get to those three really important questions that I believe all of the panelists are going to be discussing. The colleagues that I have here, really incredible individuals, and they're going to be speaking from both their professional and their personal experience. I think both are really critical and important, as I believe Ms. Lila did. A couple other folks did, talking about just those connections between what they do professionally and their personal lives when it comes to being involved in civil society. So at Volunteer Florida, I'm the Volunteer Services Director. My very broad title is a liaison among volunteer stakeholders. Very state workery of me, and I help to foster volunteerism around the state. I do a lot of training, in-person and webinars on volunteer management best practices and working with varying subpopulations. So how do we connect millennials and people who are baby boomers? How do we work with a Hispanic population, for example, or a population of individuals who speak a variety of different languages? Our state is incredibly diverse, and there are a lot of barriers to connecting volunteers to volunteer opportunities. There's a tremendous willingness, but plugging people in can be a real struggle at times. We also administer AmeriCorps, and you'll be hearing from Billy about our Corporation for National and Community Service work here in Florida. That's our federal agency for national service. And then we're also the lead agency for volunteers and donations before, during, and after disasters. So I'm tired. It's been a 2 months of just nonstop. It has been extraordinary, discouraging. There are opportunities, challenging, all kinds of things when it comes to what the fire chief talked about, which is just that excitement that people have, but then also funneling them into appropriate opportunities. We do not want people to self-deploy, incidentally. Cajun Navy, incredible example, but it's hard to connect those unaffiliated volunteers to organizations into entities where they are, we're considering liability, what their gifts and talents are, and so on. So we've been doing that the last couple of months. It's fresh on my brain if anybody has any questions about that, but really excited to be here. I'm the work group chair, and we've had a great several months of dialoguing about the work group paper and about the summit, and are looking forward to continuing with this work. So I'm going to turn it over to Liz, and she's going to introduce herself.
Good morning. My name is Liz Buckley, and I serve as the Executive Director of Catholic Volunteers in Florida. We're a small faith-based service year program in the state of Florida. We place full-time volunteers with partner nonprofits serving low-income and marginalized communities all throughout the state in Orlando, Tampa, Jacksonville, and Miami. And we have about 15 to 20 full-time volunteers at this time. So we are affiliated with AmeriCorps. So we are linked with Notre Dame Mission Volunteers AmeriCorps. So we do have the AmeriCorps Education Award for those qualifying positions.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Billy Lewis, and I serve as the State Program Director for the Corporation for National and Community Service. That's such a long name. But our agency is responsible for the administration of the Senior Corps and AmeriCorps programs. Our mission is to improve lives, strengthen communities, and foster civic engagement through service and volunteering. And how we do that is through individuals like yourselves and organizations across the entire country. We fuel and fund the well-oiled volunteer support structure machine across this nation in order to tackle some of our greatest needs. It's been exciting to be in this role. It's been an exciting opportunity for me as a former National Service alumna myself. And I'm always grateful and thankful to be able to talk about the great work that we do and how we can have individuals and agencies and organizations partner. So.
My name is Earl Clay. I'm a Floridian native. My family have been here since the 1830s. There are a few of us around. I've been teaching for many years at Florida State. I've also been volunteering for many years in various organizations, one in particular that I'll be talking about in a few minutes. I've been asked to share some ideas both as an academic and as a volunteer.
Okay, and I just want to ask a quick question to your to the audience. What is volunteerism? Pardon me? Giving of your time. Great. Excellent, excellent. Yes. Love these answers. Doing the right thing. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Helping others. Okay, great. There are lots and lots of definitions of volunteerism, and I do encourage you to really think about that as we're sharing this morning. I believe we heard from the fire chief, someone mentioned just the reality that volunteering can be episodic. It's not just the congratulations on 25 years of working hard with this organization kind of work. It can be during disaster. It can be an app that tells you that in 2 hours there's going to be some sort of donation event, and you attend and you assist with that. It can also be skills-based, and so you are giving not just of your time but of your intelligence and of your giftings. We need more and more of that, but we oftentimes think of it as having this kind of fulfilling life that in addition to what we do includes volunteerism. And that actually, I think, is a barrier in a lot of ways. People do what they call helping all the time. You can have conversations with people, particularly who are low income or people who are from different subcultures or from different countries, and ask them if they volunteer, and they will say no. And you ask them how active they are in their church, and they're putting in 50 hours of volunteer work a week. So really the way we conceptualize volunteerism has to change in some ways so that we can really reach people and help people to understand how critical it is, that they're already plugged in so many ways, that their social capital and influence and their spheres of influence is really extraordinary and really empower people who are already doing the work. A lot of our lingo at the academic level, even for someone like me who's in this particular field, I have to really work on making sure that there's a translation there when I'm having conversations with people. So I just want you to think about the bigness of volunteerism, that it doesn't always look like we think it does. A lot of people think volunteerism is something you do with the junior league or that you do when it comes to philanthropy or charitable giving. You'd be surprised how many people think that that's what we're talking about exclusively. So we do want to encourage that anyone can do that, and that many people already are and don't realize how powerful that work already is. So I do want to ask my panel why they think volunteerism is so very important.
I'm going to speak from a Florida standpoint because we're such a big state. I like to say that Florida is a microcosm of the entire United States. And so the first thing I'll point to, I always say Florida's too big to fail. We have just about every issue going on that you can think of. Anytime there's a huge national issue, we're in a top 10 or a top 5 list, right? So that's a lot to tackle. A lot of the issues that we're dealing with, a lot of the issues that our volunteers serve with are, you can think of a whale, and how do you eat a whale? One bite at a time, and many bites at a time. So when it comes to service, whether it's responding to a disaster, whether it's tutoring or mentoring, that requires a lot of different skill sets, that requires a lot of different human capital, that requires a lot of people. So we have a task at hand that always requires individuals to respond in whatever way they can. So I think it's just important because we're facing issues as a nation, we're facing issues as a state. So in one respect, we're just too big to fail. There's a huge whale, and we all have to take our bite. The other aspect that I think of volunteering is I think it builds empathy. I think it builds character. There's a lot that we don't understand because we respond to situations based on what we've experienced. And if you don't have an opportunity to experience something on a different level other than what you're accustomed to, then your perception might be a little bit narrow about what's really happening in the world and why. So I think volunteering gives us all a bit of an opportunity to grow as an individual. And then in Florida, we're such a transient state that a lot of people are very connected to volunteering because of personal reasons or personal passions. And it's hard to be connected when you're brand new, right? It's hard to meet people when you're brand new. So volunteering gives us an avenue to connect with the issues where we are. It gives us an avenue to connect with other people, and then just leads back to that growth that I was speaking of. So there's many reasons, many important reasons why volunteering is so necessary, particularly in a state such as ours, which is facing so many issues pretty much every day.
I'm going to answer this like an academic. Each one of us needs to be a volunteer. Each one of us needs to be a giver of time and money if we have it. That's an idea that doesn't come from me. It comes from a 18th century philosopher, the most important philosopher you've probably never heard of, a man named Francis Hutcheson. Francis Hutcheson taught Adam Smith most of what Smith knew about economics. He was his major professor. But Hutcheson said most of the people, most of the time, will be acting in their own self-interest, in their own economic self-interest. But he also said this. He was a very devout man. He believed very much in a benevolent creator. And he sought evidence that there was a benevolent creator. And he said the thing that we humans take the most pleasure from is giving to others, creating things of beauty and giving to others. He said material self-interest is what most people are going to act on most of the time. But they're going to find that that's not inherently satisfying. What is really inherently satisfying in our lives is acts of benevolence, doing things that help other people. That will give us the greatest sense of meaning and purpose in our lives. And he said the reason that we were created was to be benevolent.
I think just building on what Billy and Earl have just shared, for us, because we are an 11-month program, we see service as not just the means by which people are building relationships with people across difference, which I think is increasingly important in a polarized society, where we're encountering the other in a deep way, where we're getting to know people, we're getting to know their stories. We're really kind of checking our assumptions about the other, particularly across difference. And then we see service really as a hallway. I was in St. Louis last week for a convening of the Catholic Volunteer Network, and Father Greg Boyle, who I'm sure many of you know is the founder of Homeboy Industries, and talked about the survey as being the hallway to the ballroom of kinship. Ultimately, the idea that we get to know folks through a service experience, but that our job is really to challenge folks to look at the systems and structures, the civic engagement, how we can ultimately be engaged in the justice activities that change things long term in our communities for and with people. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, all of you. I think they covered everything. Does anybody else have any thoughts about that, why volunteerism is so important that they want to add? They covered it, didn't they? They did. Thank you. And so this one could take a while, but I do think it is important for us to outline challenges and obstacles. But what are the obstacles in terms of getting people to give of their time to support civic advance for the common good?
I think it's the same obstacle it's an economic obstacle, scarcity. We are living in a time where millennials have to work. They have to work a lot. They have student loans, they have mortgages, they have obligations, and feel as if they don't have the additional time, even though they are a very volunteering population. We have senior volunteers who are having to work longer. They're not retiring as early as they used to. So I think there's a scarcity within the time, both for resources and both for giving of the time, that's creating a barrier. The other thing that we're seeing is structure. I think we've come a long way in the nonprofit sector and the public sector in providing the necessary structure that's required for a great and productive volunteer experience, but we still have some ways to go. And that's where agencies like mine and Volunteer Florida have become very instrumental in helping provide some of that structure. But I think that structure is still lacking sometimes when you think about an individual whose time is so scarce, whose resources are so scarce, and they show up and find a lack of structure. So that's jarring, and sometimes it's frustrating for an individual who didn't have the time or the resources in the first place. So I think those are some of the barriers that we're seeing with our national service volunteers. We're seeing with national service volunteers who are trying to recruit volunteers, is there's scarcity with the time and the resources, and sometimes there's just a lack of structure and support needed to maintain a volunteer corps.
I would echo that. I think one thing we've recognized is we're really aiming to recruit young adults. And our program isn't just young adults, it's people of all ages and experiences. But we've had to really look at the invisible barriers within our own program around the monthly stipend. And I think 30 years ago, our program was mostly white college graduates that viewed volunteering as a way of giving back and transforming communities. And so we're really careful about, our job is not to transform communities, it's to transform ourselves in partnership with the needs and priorities of local communities. And so we have tried to address some of the challenges around economic scarcity and making sure that our benefits package is something that all young adults can live on, and that this becomes a pathway to opportunity, a pathway to employment. We've done a lot of recruiting from within the local communities we serve, so with and for our nonprofit partners, helping to identify those emerging leaders that could really benefit from the kind of program, again, that this becomes a pathway to opportunity for all. And I think the other challenge that we see is really a practical skill set about what does it mean to be civically engaged. How do we tackle those kind of long-term, partisan politics seems so divisive, and how do we begin to just take those practical steps? And so thankfully we have partners, here in this room that are supporting the kind of practical skills building with our program and with our partners to teach and train around civic engagement skills in terms of, one-to-one outreach and team building in local communities, and then brokering face-to-face conversations with public officials that may be able to be at the heart of the change we seek.
I didn't know how I was going to answer this question. That's why I let the other two go first. I think a part of the obstacle is we aren't doing nearly enough to teach our young people that giving of their time, later on of their money, is something that's just a part of who they are. I think we're doing a good job in universities. My friend Joe O'Shea back there is doing a wonderful job at our university, Florida State University. Jasmine over there I just met, but doing some good stuff at was it Broward? Universities, high schools in many cases are doing a good job of trying to help students, but many of them are falling through the cracks. We need to try to figure out better ways, structures that you were talking about, to try to get kids involved early in their lives in giving, and that it's a part of their life. Let me share a volunteer experience with you. One of the volunteer things I do is working a lot with Boy Scouts in my area. Tallahassee, North Florida, South Georgia is our council. I'm in charge of a an honor society in scouting that is called the Order of the Arrow. We use 3 Indian words, Native American words, which mean brotherhood, cheerfulness, and service. A few weeks ago, we brought about 60 boys into our organization. They go through what is called an ordeal, sort of an ordeal. I was out there laying on the ground with them. What they do is they lay on the ground for a night. They're able to bring a tarp with them. If it rains, they just pull it over them. They spend 24 hours with a little bit of food, enough to get by. The toughest thing about the ordeal is they have to be quiet for 24 hours. That is an ordeal for some of them. What we try to help them do, they're told to look at the stars, think about their place in the universe. As they do silent acts of service the next day during the day, we give them little pamphlets. Who are you? What is your life about? And it basically says, isn't your life about service to others? Isn't that your meaning and purpose in life? You are joining a brotherhood of cheerful service. Not self-service, but service to others. Unfortunately, 60 boys went through this year. There are 30,000 in our council area. Structurally, we need to be able to get these kinds of messages. There are a number of organizations that know how to convey these values to kids. I think the biggest obstacle is trying to help our kids learn what their purpose in life is, and that is a structural problem that I hope we will address today.
Thank you, Dr. Clay. And I also just want to speak quickly to the structural component. As I mentioned before, there are a lot of people who are eager to volunteer. If you show up, I think Billy was just mentioning, if you show up with 2 hours of time and you spend most of that time kind of waiting around because there aren't enough paintbrushes, how many of you all have been in that circumstance, right? You go to a cleanup, there's not quite enough for everyone to do. Those are structural components that have to do with the strategic planning on the side of the organization. So with Volunteer Florida, for example, a lot of the work we do is training in volunteer management. It's not something, in terms of being a volunteer manager or coordinator, it's not really seen as something that is a profession, so to speak. We do have a statewide network, the Florida Association for Volunteer Resource Managers. Right now it's very small. The number of individuals involved is probably less than 100. They have some really great training that they do, but in terms of really having senior management and organizations recognize that volunteer management and recruitment is a critical component of a strategic plan, it really does start there, so that those volunteer managers have the resources that they need to do this job well. I was working with a nonprofit in town. They just had a number of questions about recruitment. Actually, several nonprofits had done a training with partner organizations for Second Harvest of the Big Bend in our area. And I was blown away by the number of people who'd been in their jobs for years and years and years and had never received any training in volunteer management. Now, again, it is not something that most people would consider a profession, but it isn't just asking your neighbor to help anymore. There's strategy behind it, marketing, needs assessments, community assessments. We have a lot of duplication. What's great about one organization that's so different about another? How do you reach out to millennials? We, in that training, had 2 different job descriptions, or volunteer position descriptions. One was written specifically for people in their 20s, and one was written for persons in their 60s. In their 60s, we focused on kind of the duty and the bigger picture. And then in the 20s, it was about being inspired. And we never use the term "you can make a difference," because it's cliche if you're in your 20s. But sort of said your unique skill set is going to affect change in this organization. That's not the terminology we used for people who were maybe late Gen X or early. And I'm a zillennial, I believe is the term. So, but it was fascinating. I received so many comments from it, and this is my job, so I'd done the research to do the training well, hopefully. But people who were just thrilled with having a framework for doing their job. So on that side of structure, really being able to communicate in terms of marketing, it really is sort of business strategy when it comes to knowing who to recruit and how to recruit them. I would rather have 50 people who are competent in planting 1,000 trees than 100 people planting 1,000 trees. If those 50 people can do it, great. Put those other 50 people to work somewhere else. And that speaks to our metrics. We're all about numbers and hours, right? So if I have 50 really efficient, effective people doing the work, that doesn't look as impressive as 100 people, half of whom milled around for a while. So there's just so many ways that we can be empowering those individuals, oftentimes who, you know, quarter time are doing the volunteer work at an organization, to really see this as a critical part of the business of the organization and then go out and do it in a more professional manner. Any obstacles that anybody wants to share as we were talking that popped up? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Got it. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I love the direction you're going. At our foundation, we spent a year looking at data around folks here in Central Florida. 68% of our population is under 44. So it's kind of a different piece here. But this concept, we all wish it was 1950 when we were all programmed to do this stuff, and there was a market of people ready to do things, and all we had to do was kind of attract that market. But today we really have to make a market of people who are interested in doing this. And to her point, this concept that we have to figure out systems generationally that attract people to come to the table when they want to come to the table and make it efficient for them to do that. That sounds strange. The systemic piece of this is probably the conversion piece, because we know that if you don't engage in volunteering when you're young, it doesn't matter how much wealth you create, you'll never be a philanthropist if you didn't do this when you were young. So this really is the future, and systemically, I love the idea that we're going to train people better for service. But I think there are a lot of people out there that with the right experience and the right opportunity, we could convert by creating a market of people who would come to the table. We just have to change our somewhat archaic systems, and we've been doing it the same way for a long time.
Very well said. Thank you for that. Anybody else? Ms. Lila? Someone in the back?
I just want to add, I think it also helps to have a coordinated list of all the volunteer efforts possible. I think many people aren't even aware of what volunteer efforts are out there. We have about 26,000 hours of volunteer service to our libraries every year, but it's an aging population. As they age out, the younger folks aren't aware of these kind of things. It's not even on their radar. So something like Volunteer Florida is so important in that.
That's great. And I'll speak just very quickly to that. So Volunteer Florida, we are embarking on that task in terms of trying to develop, hi Sean, a comprehensive database that includes organizations small to large in the state, so that when people go and look up keywords, the amount of time they have and so on, those opportunities pop up. On that kind of circumstance, or if we're able to do that, if you go to one of those sites and you have an organization and the last post they have is from 2016, you have immediately lost all your millennials, probably people who are older as well. If you have an email address that bounces back, a website address that bounces back, or a phone number that's busy or is out of service, you've lost that millennial. They're going to go somewhere else. So we talk about all those types of things, and even when you generate the data, it has to be in real time. It has to be correct. So there's so many quality components of this that we really have to, we're going to work on MOUs with those organizations, saying you must check this once a month, please check this one, you know, things like that, because you can have the opportunities, but they've got to be accurately represented for people. So
Jovita, you touched on this. I'd like to elaborate on it just a bit from the business perspective. An obstacle in asking corporations to engage has been the person who's making the ask not fully appreciating what the company needs. Obviously, volunteerism and giving is the right thing to do, but these large corporations who answer to shareholders or are trying to set an example internally have got to be able to brand themselves or market themselves, and I think that appreciating that that's no longer self-serving is really the key to success with some of these organizations becoming better volunteers and better giving. So it's sort of a blurry line now between community good and marketing. I'm finding that a lot of the corporations, as long as you can show them how their name can be associated with a great effort, they're willing to give more, not just in terms of dollars, but making their organization affiliated with a personal cause that may be about hours as well.
Sure. Great, thank you. And we'll do one more, and then we'll hear from the panel again.
I just want to piggyback a couple. Bevan Rogel, Encore Tampa Bay.
Oh, hi, Bevan.
Hi, Jovita.
Lots of people I've emailed with, so it's nice to know their faces.
I've been working with boomers for about 5 years now under the Encore movement. And just to build on a couple things that you've already said, we did in our age-friendly listening sessions over the last year, the number one thing is people are saying, I want to volunteer, but I'm not sure what I want to do, and I'm not sure really where to go. And in Tampa Bay alone, there's over 10 different technology platforms that are there, and it's like, well, which one do I go to? And for boomers, we're still confused. We're trying to figure out what this second half is going to be, and they haven't even narrowed down, is it helping puppies? Is it helping homeless? Right. Is it helping mothers? So a lot of it is just not on the fact of the structure as the issue, but the other is on the potential volunteer of they don't know what they don't know, and they don't know how to get started.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Bob.
No, I was just going to say, were you about to announce a break?
I was not.
Sorry.
So up here I did ask Bob, because we started 15 minutes late into our panel, and everyone seems thoroughly engaged, Bob. So I think we should continue, Bob, for a few more minutes.
Okay.
Bob. Okay. Thank you, sir. So the last question I want to get to, and Billy, I would love for you to speak very briefly to VISTA and the recruitment efforts of VISTA members, and then Dr. Clay, in terms of what you've seen over time when it comes to more individuals being involved with the Boy Scouts. But this question is, what can we do to get more people to volunteer in their communities? And what can we do to assure that volunteering has a maximum possible impact? But we'll focus on what can we do to get more people to volunteer. What have you seen that works?
I'm just taking the mic. Did you want to start there?
Billy, are you a firstborn? Are you a firstborn?
No.
Okay, it might just be the Caribbean parent for both of us. So.
I'm the baby, so there's a couple different things. I had the pleasure of serving as an AmeriCorps Vista member, and for those of you who don't know, AmeriCorps Vista is one of our very unique AmeriCorps programs within our agency. It's the only national service program that focuses on anti-poverty and capacity building, sustainability, and community empowerment. It's very rigid in terms of its goals. The unique thing about AmeriCorps Vista is that it helps agencies do just what Jovita is asking. How do we build impact? It helps agencies kind of realize their actual potential by building their capacity. And so some things that we're seeing that Vistas are really heavily engaged in, and really are issues generally that should be addressed, are, number one, collaboration. Collaboration is so key. I heard from a couple of you and my fellow panelists here about duplication. Right? We have a lot of people doing a lot of the same things. Some things work, some things don't. And VISTA and our agency as a whole kind of become that glue and that conduit to bring those organizations together, to bring those resources together. I heard this really neat quote about what do you think is more impactful, 1 or 5? And most people will say 5, and they say visually 1 or 5. you know? And so when you think about that one and bringing people together, bringing those different stakeholders with different resources and skill sets to the table to attack an issue like the opioid epidemic, which is a multifaceted issue, that's where AmeriCorps Vista really comes into play. That's where our agency comes into play. So when I think about maximum impact and the contributions of Vista and our agency, I think about the collaboration that we provide and we make happen. I also think about the strategy that we provide. A lot of our nonprofits, a lot of our public sector agencies, a lot of our corporate partners, they're busy, 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 right? Sometimes it's hard to sit down and really think about what is it we're trying to do here? How do we want to do it? What does it take to make it happen? And one of the things I'm seeing lately is what is really the problem? And so AmeriCorps Vista and our agency in all of our programs actually provides an opportunity to really sit down and strategize and really think about what the issues are, what it's going to take to solve those issues, what skill sets and resources are needed to solve those issues, what are some realistic outcomes with those issues. So it's that strategy, that development, that assessment that's required where we really plug in. The other thing that I think about when I think of Vista and what National Service does is, and what my colleague was saying here, is really presenting service as a lifestyle. It's not a nicety anymore. It's not something we do on a Saturday afternoon. It's necessary. We're facing a lot of issues, and within our state alone, we're fourth in nation with the opioid crisis. I think we're about 29 in school district rankings. Our landscape is about to change due to the recent disasters. When I think of the effects of Maria and what's happening, and how our organization is having to plug in, and the strategy that's required to really make this machine work. I think about our work, and I think about the impact that's going to happen because of our work. So it's definitely the collaboration, it's the strategy, and then it's making service a lifestyle. It's a game changer. And like I said before, what do you do when you're faced with eating a whale? You take one bite at a time. And the whale that we have is going to require a lot of different bites.
Great, thank you.
Let me share, again, the academic and the volunteer. Usually when I talk to groups, I sound like I'm a member of the Chamber of Commerce of Tallahassee, Leon County. I'm also going to admit the truth. Leon County has the highest crime rate in the state of Florida. Florida has one of the highest crime rates in the United States. Where does that leave us? The state of Florida spends more money on the Department of Corrections than it does on the state colleges and universities combined. We act sometimes like we don't know what to do. Yes, we do. A wonderful academic, one of the most important sociologists of the 20th century, a man named Philip Selznick, wrote a wonderful book back around 1994 called The Moral Commonwealth. What are the requisites for having a successful democratic society? He said it boils down to thinking first about the kids and raising them in a certain way. And he said if you raise children with a sense of character and conscience, if you give people, children and adults, opportunities to positively participate in their society, participate is the key word, participate in the economy, participate as volunteers, participate in working families, things of that sort. The more you provide character and conscience, and that means raising kids with a sense of meaning and purpose that they will carry into their adult lives, the more opportunities for participation you have, the less you're going to have to spend on control. It boils down to that. Now let me move over to the volunteer. And I'm going to share with you something not from the Boy Scouts of America or the Girl Scouts of America, but the Scouts of South Africa. I used to spend some time in South Africa back in the late 1990s, early part of this century, working with the University of Pretoria. I made a point to get to know scouting in South Africa a little bit. What I discovered was that when I went down there, the chief scout was a gentleman named Mr. Nkomo. Mr. Nkomo had been a prisoner in Robben Island with Nelson Mandela. Mr. Nkomo had been a scout as a child. It was segregated. He had to belong to a black troop. Other boys had to belong to white troops. But World Scouting does not allow that kind of segregation. They came together, breaking the law, playing together in jamborees, things of that sort. The kinds of values that the World Scouting movement tries to teach are the basic values that are essential for people to carry with them into adulthood to make a democratic society work. Mandela was not a scout when he was a child. He learned about scouting from Mr. Nkomo. So after Mr. Mandela was released and after the new Constitution took effect in 1994, Mr. Nkomo became the chief scout of South Africa, and Mr. Mandela became the patron of scouting for South Africa for the rest of his life. My point is, I think we do know what to do. We just need to figure out how to convey the messages to our kids. What is it that makes for character and conscience? What makes for a sense of purpose and meaning in their lives? How to carry it through their lives? How to learn to be of service to others?
Thank you so much. And I know we do need to take a quick break, so I do want to thank all of our panelists for being here today. And you'll notice that we have opportunities to brainstorm at our tables about each of these work group areas, so we really covet your responses in that respect. And then I hope if you have any thoughts for me specifically or for any of the panelists that you'll come up and chat. We really want to be sure that that networking component of this summit is used mightily. So I'm all ears, would love to have any dialogue that you all have an interest in about volunteer management best practices, et cetera. I think it'd be wonderful for you to learn more about the Boy Scouts, about the ASCU school. I know that you've just passed on the position. But, and then also about Catholic volunteers or about AmeriCorps or any of our other CNCS National Service programs. So thank you all so much, and thank you to Bob and Stu.
Thank you, Jovita.